Gentlewoman reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield 5 minutes to my good friend and colleague in the New York delegation, Representative Lawler.
Gentleman from New York is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In a time when middle-class families are increasingly squeezed by the rising cost of living, providing real tax relief is imperative. That is why I introduced the SALT Marriage Penalty Elimination Act, which is designed to correct an inequity that has burdened married couples across New York and the United States since 2017. The current tax code unfairly caps state and local tax deductions, otherwise known as SALT, at $10,000 for married couples filing jointly, essentially penalizing them for their marital status and depriving them of the full $20,000 deduction they would rightly deserve. This arbitrary threshold does not reflect the economic realities faced by dual-income households, especially in high-cost areas like New York's 17th District. It's an issue that transcends tax policy. It's about fairness and supporting the backbone of our communities, our families. The implications of the SALT cap are significant. Since its implementation, we've witnessed a dramatic decline in taxpayers claiming the SALT deduction, a drop from nearly 50% in my district to 19%, or nationwide from 31% to 9%. This stark decrease has disproportionately impacted high-cost states like New York, where the cost of living far exceeds the national average. In my district alone, the percentage of filers itemizing taxes have halved since the cap's introduction, underscoring the urgent need for reform. The SALT Marriage Penalty Elimination Act, my first bill introduced in the House, seeks to address this issue head-on by eliminating the marriage penalty and reinstating a fair deduction limit. During the Rules Committee hearing, there was some insinuation that this legislation was hurried and rushed in the dead of night. Well, I'm here to tell you that this legislation has been available for people to review for over 13 months and is less than 2 pages long. This isn't some 1,000-page omnibus deal. It's something that we've worked on with Republican leadership and our Democratic colleagues to address for over a year. Passage of the SALT Marriage Penalty Elimination Act would represent a significant step toward alleviating the financial burden faced by countless families in my district and across the country, offering relief from the double taxation that has unjustly impacted them. Additionally, with housing costs reaching near record highs and inflation continuing to erode purchasing power, the need for this bill is all the more necessary. For instance, in Rockland and Westchester counties in my district, the monthly cost of a mortgage surged by $1,000 in the past year alone, thanks to rate increases brought about by the trillions in new spending from this administration and the prior Congress. These spikes in housing costs, coupled with rising grocery prices, are unsustainable for the average family, making tax relief essential. This House Republican majority was built by the contributions of New Yorkers, and this legislation would help those same New Yorkers see immediate tax relief. Some critics might balk at the cost of this measure. The fact is that relief provided to families across the country would spur additional economic growth that would outpace the minor costs. This bill is a compromise that fixes an unfair penalty and stands to revitalize communities, stimulate economic activity, and most importantly, support the hardworking families who are the lifeblood of our nation. It provides immediate tax relief. SALT is expected to expire in 2025, but these families can't wait that long. And so I urge all of my colleagues to support this pro-family measure that corrects this unfair penalty, and I encourage my Democratic colleagues to support it as well. They talk a good game, but when they had complete control in the prior Congress, they failed to provide a fix. They failed to enact legislation that would provide immediate tax relief. Governor Hochul, Senator Schumer, Senator Gillibrand, and Leader Jeffries have been silent. They should embrace this. They should be championing it. They should be supporting our efforts. This is about providing real, tangible support to those who need it. As we move forward, I'm hopeful that this can be a moment of unity amongst my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, reflecting the bipartisan understanding that when it comes to supporting our families, fairness is critical. Together, we can ensure that unfair tax policies that penalize families are a thing of the past, putting the well-being of American families above all. I yield back.
Gentleman is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Today I rise to show my strong support for this aid package that will support our closest ally, Israel. Providing much-needed assistance for Israel and for U.S. forces in the Middle East region reaffirms our unwavering commitment to democracy, security, and peace in the Middle East. This is a funding package that will enhance Israel's defense capabilities, specifically in the area of missile and rocket defense, with significant allocations for the Iron Dome and David Sling systems, and the innovative Iron Beam system designed to counteract shorter-range threats. All of these are made even more necessary due to Iran's investment in weapons for terrorists around the region, including Hamas, the Houthis, Hezbollah, and others. And these groups are expanding their attacks on U.S. troops. This aid package should transcend partisan lines. It is about more than supporting Israel's right to defend itself. It is about securing our strategic interests and showing support for our closest ally, Israel. That's why I was shocked to see that President Biden swore to veto this legislation, which provides our ally Israel with essential aid. There are no policy riders or poison pills. It is a clean bill supporting the state of Israel. This should not be political, and it shouldn't be that complicated. Yet, for whatever reason, Joe Biden has indicated he would veto this bill, and House and Senate Democrats are falling all over themselves to oppose it. It has been 122 days since the terrorist attack of October 7th. The House passed an aid package months ago. The Senate did not act. And according to reports, the Senate may not even have the votes tomorrow to pass their supplemental bill. Therefore, this may end up being the only bill in town. And I just can't understand why my Democratic colleagues, whether you think it's political or not, vote yes. What are you, crazy? I just don't even understand the logic. It's a clean bill. Vote yes. Even ultimately, if the Senate does pass their bill and it does come here, then we'll deal with that. But why would you ever want to be on the record on a clean bill opposing aid to the state of Israel? It's foolish. It's my sincere hope that all of my colleagues will find the moral courage to support this funding package and support Israel in her time of need while providing critical resources to our troops overseas. A little common sense here. Vote yes. I yield back.
Gentleman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It is not political when you have 2,459 U.S. service members that were killed. It is not political when 20,769 U.S. service members were wounded. It is not political when 18 CIA operatives were killed, or 1,822 civilian contractors killed. It's not political when over 1,000 Americans were left on the ground in Afghanistan. And it's damn well not political when 13 U.S. service members died at the bombing at Abbey Gate. It is not political to want answers for these families, to want answers for the service members, our veterans, who continue to suffer from PTSD. 22 veteran suicides a day. It is not political to want answers for them and their families. So to my colleagues on the other side, tell the Gold Star families that want answers about this disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan that you believe their request to hold Secretary Blinken accountable is political. The service and the sacrifice of our soldiers and our veterans matters, and they deserve answers. And if you want to know what was political, then look no further than the actual disastrous withdrawal. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris announced a date certain to ensure that all U.S. troops were out of Afghanistan before September 11th, 2021, conditions on the ground be damned. Joe Biden wanted to say that he ended the war before the 20th anniversary. If that isn't political, then what the hell is? Antony Blinken has refused to cooperate with this committee, refused to testify before this committee on the withdrawal in the 118th Congress. He has been here twice to testify about the State Department's budget. But he certainly has not afforded this committee the respect to answer the questions related to the disastrous decision to withdraw in violation of the Doha Agreement, not because of the Doha Agreement. This administration chose politics over the safety and well-being of our U.S. service members. They chose politics over the safety and the well-being of the Americans that were left in Afghanistan. They chose politics over the safety and well-being of the Afghan refugees who helped us over the course of this 20-year war. Secretary Blinken has a responsibility to come before this committee, to come before the representatives of the American people and answer the questions about this disastrous decision to withdraw. Kamala Harris, who said she was the last person in the room, proudly, still has not met with the 13 Gold Star families, still has not offered her personal condolences to those families. She wasn't at the dignified transfer when Joe Biden was looking at his watch, trying to get out of there as fast as he could. This administration's handling of the withdrawal in Afghanistan has created a tinderbox around the world. We are in the most precarious place since World War II because of their disastrous foreign policy, starting with this withdrawal, continuing with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the terrorist attack on Israel, the illicit oil trade between Iran and China, the threats in the Indo-Pacific from China against Taiwan. Add in their botched mishandling of the border. This administration is a disgrace. And the fact that Secretary Blinken couldn't be bothered to be here, not just today, but over the course of this entire 118th Congress, to answer questions on this matter. It matters to these families. It matters to the American people. And it damn well matters to our active duty military and our veterans. The only thing political here was the decision to withdraw by a date certain in violation of the Doha Agreement. That is the only thing that is political, and the fact that my colleagues can't accept that, but would rather carry water for the Secretary of State is an absolute abomination. I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. Chair recognizes Ms. Dean.
Thank you.
Gentleman's time has expired. With that, go to the gentleman from New York, Mr. Lawler. He's recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Secretary, when was the last time you met with President Biden in person?
I meet with President Biden over a wide range of issues, the economy, China,
When was the last time you
Russia.
met with him in person?
I'm not going to comment on my meetings with the president. Those are private.
Well, as a cabinet secretary, have you noticed any mental or cognitive decline in any of these meetings?
The president is extremely effective in the meetings that I've been in with him. That includes many international meetings that are multi-hour, like his meetings with President Xi. I've met with him with other leaders who are in
So are you
Washington
testifying
and
that you have
elsewhere.
not seen any mental or cognitive decline?
Mr. Chairman, point of inquiry. She's not a physician.
She's a member of the
She's
cabinet.
not, you're asking her a medical question.
Let's keep the comments to the subject.
It's not a medical question. It's her interpretation as a member of the cabinet.
What I-
I'm
And
just
I move
asking
to
what
have
your
those
testimony
words
is.
taken down. Mr. Chairman, I move to have those
That's
words
it.
taken down. She is
Listen.
not a physician.
Will people please not go between the witness and the committee? Okay. Mr. Lawler, she's answered the question. Let's move on. You're recognized for the balance of your time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Secretary, have there been any discussions among cabinet secretaries about invoking the 25th Amendment?
No.
Okay. The supplemental appropriations bill
She has a
enacted
request
in
to
April
evacuate, so
contained two of my bills, the SHIP Act, which requires the imposition of sanctions on foreign ports and refineries that knowingly process Iranian oil, and the Iran-China Energy Sanctions Act, which requires you to close correspondent accounts for Chinese banks if they are involved in petroleum transactions with the Central Bank of Iran or another sanctioned Iranian financial institution. This applies no matter how minor or infrequent the transaction may be. In March, General Kurilla, the head of CENTCOM, testified before the Armed Services Committee that Iran continues to sell 90% of its oil to China, funding Tehran's subversive activities across the region. That is a quote. Anyone who participates in the sale of Iranian oil plays a role in helping the regime evade U.S. sanctions. Engaging in this trade is tantamount to aiding and abetting a terrorist state, and it must end. These sanctions create a significant financial incentive for ports and refineries to stop dealing in Iranian oil, or else lose access to the U.S. economy. Since Joe Biden took office, Iranian oil sales are up over $100 billion. $100 billion increase. Can you speak to where you are in implementing these laws, the SHIP Act and the Iran-China Energy Sanctions Act, and will you commit to swiftly implementing these sanctions as required by the law?
So I need to look into the details of where we are with respect to these particular acts, but we have put in place a wide array of sanctions on Iran, including for oil dealings. We have sanctioned firms in other countries that are involved with the Iran oil trade, and we are constantly evaluating additional sanctions to put in place.
Since the supplemental aid package passed, have you had any meetings on the SHIP Act or the Iran-China Energy Sanctions Act?
I have regular meetings with my staff.
Have you had any discussions on those two provisions of the supplemental?
I've discussed with them Iranian sanctions.
Specifically, the SHIP Act and the Iran-China Energy
Honestly,
Sanctions
that's
Act.
not the way we organize our discussions. We talk about our Iranian program and what we're doing.
So I'm going to interpret your answer as to be no, you have not had discussions on the SHIP Act and the Iran-China Energy Sanctions Act, and the Treasury Department has not advanced sanctions with respect to those two laws.
I have not said that.
Well, is it yes or no?
I have had discussions with them, and it's covered a wide array of sanctions issues in connection with Iran. I'm not sure specifically which actions have to do with which aspects of the law.
I sent a
and that's
letter-
not how it's presented to me.
I sent a letter specifically on the SHIP Act and the Iran-China Energy Sanctions Act to you and Secretary Blinken a few weeks ago. We have not heard back. We certainly would appreciate a detailed response as to what has been done to implement the law that was passed under the supplemental aid package. And in my remaining time, have you communicated the sanctions risk to Beijing at all with respect to the Iran-China Energy Sanctions Act?
We have discussed with them our concerns about Chinese businesses and others involved with.
But not
these
specifically
matters.
on the Iran-China Energy Sanctions Act.
We have discussed an array of sanctions issues.
Okay.
Gentleman's time has expired. Just a reminder to the committee that getting into the personal business effects of the president as well as Mr. Trump is inappropriate for this committee.
Michael Lawler of New York.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When President Biden took office, he made a lot of ill-thought-out and, frankly, foolish foreign policy decisions. But at the top of the list was delisting the Houthis. While the Houthis were a designated foreign terrorist organization under the Trump administration, for clear reasons, President Biden almost immediately took them off the list. He did this apparently in an attempt to encourage the Houthis to reduce hostilities, enter into talks, and improve the conditions for the Yemeni people. But shockingly, just the opposite happened. The Houthis did not reduce hostilities and instead renewed efforts to expand territorial control inside of Yemen. We have also been unable to negotiate a meaningful resolution with the Houthis. And of course, the Yemeni people are still living under oppression. Dr. Pollack, can you go into some detail about the conditions and abuses the Yemeni people living under Houthi control have been living in for the past few years?
Briefly, Dr. Alterman began this. The Houthis are terrible at governance. They do not understand how to run a country. They never were particularly interested in doing so. And I think they were surprised when they had the opportunity to do so. The economy in Yemen is stalled badly. As we all know, there are enormous problems in terms of food distribution. Oil production, well, the Houthis have very little control over it, but in their areas there's very little going on. And we also need to recognize that the international community has been very rightly concerned about the humanitarian situation in Yemen for many years. The Houthis have not. Very famously, in 2018, a joint Yemen government and Emirati force was threatening to take the last Houthi-controlled seaport of Hodeidah. The world was terrified that there would be slaughter in Hodeidah. We descended upon the Emiratis, and the Yemeni government begged them to stop. They agreed to do so. The Houthis were forced to sign an agreement because they were about to lose Hodeidah. And the idea was they would leave Hodeidah to enable humanitarian supplies. They, of course, immediately reneged.
So that we're clear here, delisting the Houthis did nothing to help the Yemeni people and worsened regional security. In light of this administration's failed policy and the Houthis' continued aggression against the U.S., Ms. Ledeen, do you think the group should be relisted as an FTO?
As soon as possible, yes.
Ms. Ledeen, do the Houthis meet all the qualifications to be listed as an FTO?
Absolutely, they do, yes.
And we passed a bill through this committee last week to require the relisting of the Houthis as an FTO. So from that bill and from this conversation and from my absolutely clear picture of what is happening in the Gulf region, it is my hope that the administration does the right thing and relists them immediately as an FTO. One of the bills that I passed through the House Foreign Affairs Committee was the SHIP Act, which I led with my friend and colleague Jared Moskowitz. This bill would establish new sanctions on entities that process illicit Iranian petroleum. Ports and refineries that facilitate Iran's oil trade are effectively financing the Iranian regime and its terrorist proxies. It is no secret that Iran sends financial and material assistance to Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis, just to name a few. Can you all confirm that Iran provides funding to terrorist groups in the region?
Yes, they do.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
Do you all believe that the President and his administration, State Department, and Defense Department know, just like all of you, that Iran funds these terrorist groups?
There's no doubt, yes.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
How have Iran's proxy activities changed since the Biden administration came into office and relaxed enforcement of sanctions? Has it gotten better?
Far from it. They've become much more violent and aggressive, and they've caused many deaths and destruction across the region. Yes.
Mr. Lawler, I think after the assassination of Qasem Soleimani, the head of the Quds Force of the Islamic Republican Guard, many of these proxy groups have had more autonomy, and I think the Iranians have enjoyed the fact that they have had less responsibility and less control, and that in many ways they have reaped more benefits from the misbehavior of these groups, but they have less control over these groups than they had under Qasem Soleimani.
So is your argument that Soleimani should have been left alone?
My argument is that assassinating Qasem Soleimani has not ended the threat from the Iranian proxy groups, and in many ways the way it has morphed.
Did you oppose his assassination?
Nobody. Do I oppose it now? I'm saying it didn't have the desired effect because...
Well, it doesn't have the desired effect because this administration has weakened its sanctions. When you allow oil revenues to increase $80 billion, nearly 60% since this administration took office, and these funds are being used to fund Hamas, to fund Hezbollah, to fund the Houthis, then yeah, you're right. There's not a good consequence of that. But that has nothing to do with assassinating Soleimani. That has everything to do with this administration's policy position to be weak on Iran. That's a policy choice that this administration has made. And that is a function of relaxing sanctions on the sale of Iranian petroleum. That's why I introduced the SHIP Act. China is the biggest purchaser of Iranian petroleum.
Mr. Chairman, you asked us to abide by 5 minutes.
And thank you very much, Congressperson Lawler. So we need to proceed, okay?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And hey, I was trying to be respectful to the congressman from Tennessee to get him back over here to sit quietly so he could ask his questions. And
Gentleman yields back. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes. Madam Secretary, I took note of my colleague Mr. Torres's comments about NYCHA receiving roughly 80% of the rent reimbursements. And you said if that was applied to a private landlord, quote, not be happy. But that's exactly what happens with New York City's arbitrary rent control laws every day. Do you support New York City's rent control laws?
I have no idea what they are other than the fact that they try to keep housing moderate. It's not something that we deal with at HUD.
Do you support rent control in general?
Depends on how it's done. I mean, in general, yes.
Okay.
Depending on, but every tub sits on its own bottom. I can't say I agree with it across the country.
So in the biggest city in America, you're not aware of New York City's rent control laws as the HUD Secretary?
I'm aware of the law. I just have not read it. I don't know what's in it.
Do you support the general concept of good cause eviction?
What does that mean?
Good cause eviction is a law being proposed in New York that would make it extremely hard for a landlord to evict a tenant.
I've not read the New York law, obviously, and I'd have to do that in order to say whether I support it or not.
Okay. You said you support rent control laws. Is the rental property that you own in Warrensville, Ohio, subject to rent control?
I don't have really any rental property.
You don't? Your financial disclosure form specifies that you have a rental property.
My mother lives in it and my niece lives in it. I guess I don't consider it rental property.
Okay. I mean, you label it a rental property.
It is.
So,
yeah.
Okay.
Technically, it is.
Okay. Well, I mean, technically.
And it is rent controlled, quite frankly. It is.
Rent controlled by law or by you?
By me.
Okay. Fair enough. Madam Secretary, I took note of your exchange with Chairman McHenry earlier about the length of time that you've been sitting here testifying. It's been over 900 days since you last testified before this committee. When you last testified, you stated, "I pledge this. If I have the honor of being confirmed, I will be accessible to you. I will listen to you. And I will be a partner to you to solve the housing challenges your constituents are facing back home. I expect you to hold me accountable along the way. I welcome that accountability, and I will always strive to be transparent and a good faith partner as we work together." It's been over 900 days. since you last testified here. Do you support a yearly requirement for the HUD Secretary to testify before Congress?
I think it's reasonable, but let me just be clear again. It's been 900 days not because of me. We have worked many times to try to schedule this. The only definitive date I have ever received from this committee for last year was December 6th, and that day I could not attend. That is the only date I have been given by this committee. And I do respond to every inquiry I receive. So I have done what I said I would do.
Well, I think Chairman McHenry had an inquiry that had not been responded to, but so you support a yearly requirement. I have legislation to do that.
I think it's reasonable.
Okay, so you will endorse that, and
I don't need to endorse it. I mean, it's up to you. I just believe it is reasonable.
Okay, but I mean, when the Fed chairman is coming in, when the Treasury Secretary is coming in on a yearly basis, and in many cases testifying multiple times a year, I would think the HUD Secretary certainly
I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm saying to you, I think it is reasonable. You don't have to convince me.
Great. So we will move forward with that, and we look forward to you being here on a yearly basis. We're about 6.5 million units underbuilt in this country right now. There's no question we have a supply issue in this country. What is your main objective to actually help increase supply? What is the best pathway forward that you as HUD Secretary are working on while respecting home rule, as you said to Mr. Garbarino before, to actually help incentivize the building of housing units in this country?
We create an environment in which people want to build, one that has less regulation, more input from communities, zoning issues that need to be changed, planning issues. We are creating an environment through assistance through low-income housing tax credits, through housing trust fund resources, through housing finance agencies, through the Federal Financing Bank. We've done an awful lot to create an environment in which people want to build.
I just want to clarify one last thing. You said earlier 40% of housing is owned by private corporations. According to Freddie Mac, only 2.5% is owned in the purchase market.
I said in the next 10 years.
In the last 10 years?
I said in the next 10 years.
Oh, and you're just coming up with a number?
No, it's a number that's been projected through people who do this work. No, I didn't just come up with a number. I'll send you the report.
We would love to see the report because 2.5% to 40% is a massive jump.
I'll send it to you tomorrow.
But you said that owning private corporations owning is a bad thing. I just want to make sure you don't actually think private corporations owning property is actually a bad thing.
I did not say a bad thing. That's your word. What I said was, when they buy these properties, if they hold them and not put them back on the market, what it does is increase the cost of the housing that is already there. I even said it's not illegal. Don't put words in my mouth.
Okay. Just want to clarify.
You've extended time.
Thank you.
Look where you are.
I see. It happens every committee hearing.
Okay, then I'll take the extra time.
Gentlewoman from New Mexico reserves. The gentlewoman from Minnesota is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I yield 4 minutes to the gentleman from New York.
It's good to know that my Democratic colleague would rather children in the Congo mine for cobalt than to create American jobs here and put in place environmental safeguards. But thank you for putting that on the record. Madam Speaker, today I rise in support of the rule to bring my Anti-Semitism Awareness Act to the floor. I want to thank Chairman Burgess, Chairman Jordan, Leader Scalise, and Speaker Johnson for their support for consideration of this bill and their leadership in combating anti-Semitism on college campuses. What's happening on college campuses right now is horrifying. We've seen folks at these encampments telling Jews to go back to Poland as if they weren't kicked out of their homes, murdered in cold blood, and sent to death camps less than a century ago. The leader of the protest at Columbia called for death to Zionists. There was a sign at George Washington calling for a final solution, which was the name of Hitler's plan to exterminate Jews. People shouting that they are Hamas and calling for the burning of Tel Aviv to the ground. They chant for Intifada and from the river to the sea. These are not peaceful protests expressing their constitutional right to free speech. These are illegal encampments where demonstrators engage in harassment and where they urge violence against Jewish students, Jewish Americans, the U.S. government, the Israeli government, and more. I unequivocally condemn the college administrators that haven't acted to quell these encampments and who have enabled their campuses to become unsafe environments for Jewish students. At the federal level, we must give the Department of Education the tools to identify and prosecute any anti-Semitic hate crimes committed and hold college administrators accountable for refusing to address anti-Semitism on their campuses. This legislation defines anti-Semitism using the IRA working definition and its contemporary examples so that there can be no confusion or interpretation when it comes to the heinous act of discrimination and violation of Title VI of the Civil Rights Act. It has broad bipartisan support in the House and the Senate, 59 co-sponsors in the House, including over a dozen Democrats. So this is not about dividing Democrats. This has broad bipartisan support. If there are people in your conference that embrace anti-Semitism, that's not our fault. That's something you should be rooting out. When people engage in harassment or bullying of Jewish individuals where they justify the killing of Jews or use blood libel or hold Jews collectively responsible for the actions of the Israeli government, that is anti-Semitic. There's no question about it. It's unfortunate that we need to clarify that these actions are anti-Semitic, but it makes this bill that much more necessary. What is happening at Columbia, at Yale, at UCLA, and so many other schools is reprehensible and alarming. But it cannot be discouraging. We must act so that the anti-Semitism on college campuses stops immediately. Our country's anti-discrimination laws must work for all of us, including Jewish students. Now, my Dem colleagues are tripping all over themselves because of electoral politics. They're worried about votes in Michigan and Minnesota and trying to placate a pro-Hamas element of their party. People who are parroting Hamas talking points. Literally, when I was at Columbia University last Wednesday with Speaker Johnson, Hamas endorsed the protesters on the campus grounds, saying that they are the future leaders of America. If those are the future leaders of America, God help us.
I would yield an additional 30 seconds.
We should be very clear. Charlottesville was wrong. January 6th was wrong. Taking over a courthouse in Portland was wrong. Burning down a police station in Minneapolis was wrong. Breaking in and seizing control of the library at Columbia University is wrong. Let's call it all out and stop being a bunch of cowards. Anti-Semitism needs to be rooted out, and any member who votes against this bill should hang their head in shame.
Madam Speaker, I appreciate my colleagues' work.
Thank you, Congressman Gottheimer, and I'd like to also bring up Congressman Swazi from New York, as well as the Nutra family, who have shown such courage, such stoicism in the face of severe adversity. Every parent can only imagine the horror that these parents have had to endure, these family members have had to endure for months, 152 days, hoping, praying for their loved ones to return home. And for all of us as members of Congress, we have spent a lot of time with these families, the families of the American hostages, as well as those families of all the Israeli hostages. And we have worked valiantly to try, with the administration, to bring their loved ones home, and we will not rest until they are brought home. And these families, at a moment of immense grief, have taken the time to come and meet with members of Congress on what is almost a daily basis. Because that's how important it is. And that's how much they care, not just about their own loved one, but all of the loved ones who are being held hostage. All of us have shown over the past many months our strong support for the State of Israel, and we will continue to be unwavering in our support for Israel and their right to defend themselves, and unwavering in our opposition to Hamas, and unwavering in our demands that the hostages be brought home safely. I want to thank Speaker Johnson for working with me, along with Congressman Swazi, to make sure that the Nutra family has tickets for tomorrow night's State of the Union, so that all three of them can attend as our guests. And this is truly bipartisan, and intentionally so. But this is bigger than politics. And these families should be heard. Their loved ones should be remembered. And we, as an American government, need to do everything we can to bring them home. And so with that, I will invite, Tom wants to say a few words, and then Orna, or however you'd like to do it.
So let me just... Another New York Congressman, Mike Lawler.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, for being here in New York. I want Palestinians to be free, too, from their oppressor, Hamas. And every single one of you students that support Hamas are an absolute abomination. It is shameful, shameful that you would support a terrorist organization that butchered and beheaded and burned innocent women, children, and babies. I went to Israel a month after the attack on October 7th, and I watched a 21-minute unedited video, raw footage of the attack. I watched exactly what Hamas did. And sadly here in America, we have students endorsing the butchering and brutality of a terrorist organization. If you want a ceasefire, the fastest way for a ceasefire to occur is for Hamas to surrender and to release the hostages. And if you can't call for that, you are a pathetic embarrassment to this institution and to students everywhere. It is time for President Shafiq to resign in disgrace. She has lost control of this campus. She has lost control of this institution. And after listening to her comments inside, it is clear that she has no intention of getting this university under control and ensuring the safety and well-being of every student. That is what is entitled to students attending this institution. If the students are not safe, if the institution will not act, Congress has a responsibility to do so, and we will.
That's right, Mr. Speaker.
5 minutes. Mr. Secretary, do you agree with Senator Schumer's call for regime change in Israel?
No. Well, let me say this. I'm not sure what call you're referring to, but
Senator Schumer stood on the Senate floor, I'm sure you saw the speech, and demanded regime change in Israel.
That's not for.
Do you agree with Senator Schumer?
Not for us to decide who Israel's government is.
So, yes or no? Do you agree?
I didn't. That's not what I heard him say. But regardless, it's not for us to decide who Israel's government is.
Do you agree with Nancy Pelosi that Prime Minister Netanyahu should resign?
Again, it's not for us to say. These are decisions for the Israelis to make.
Do you agree with the Hamas Ministry of Health's death toll?
The precise figures we can't validate. The general number of dead, wounded, injured. We know it's the toll is terrible, and the Israelis acknowledge that themselves.
So we don't have an actual count?
A precise number? No, it's almost impossible to get a precise number in the midst of a war.
So on the decisions that the administration has made with respect to providing Israel lethal aid, what are you using as a metrics to make the determination?
Oh, we have our evaluations, we have our assessments that are not simply what the Hamas ministry is putting out, but our own intelligence, information from a variety of sources.
So do you reject the Hamas Ministry of Health's numbers?
In terms of the precision of the numbers, I can't validate those numbers, but generally speaking, the rough number
is
of
the
total
position
deaths,
of the State Department that they're not accurate?
again, are they accurate to the person? Of course, we can't validate that. It's impossible to do that.
The United Nations recently revised down the death toll by almost 50%. Do you believe that to be accurate?
Again, those with absolute precision, we can't say. But listen, if it's 14,000 children or 7,000 children, it's still 7,000 children too many.
Do you blame Israel or Hamas for that?
I blame Hamas has created this the crossfire that so many of these people are caught up in.
Okay, you agree they use their own innocent civilians as human shields,
I do,
correct?
but I also believe that Israel must maximize every possible effort to protect civilians.
Well, didn't the State Department put out a report saying that they are?
We put out a report that went through this in some detail, both in terms of the use of weapons and also humanitarian
And what
assistance.
did your report find? Is Israel using maximum care or no?
Our report found that based on the totality of damage that's been done, it's reasonable to assess that in some instances, Israel has acted in ways that are not in accordance with international humanitarian law. Those instances are under a review and investigation by us, but also critically by Israel. And that's the important point as well. It has the ability to self-police, and we have to hold ourselves, whether it's Israel, the United States, or any other democracy, to the highest possible standards in war, even a war that was brought to them by a vicious terrorist group and one that engages in practices like hiding behind civilians. Even there, they and we have an obligation to do everything possible to make sure that, to the best of our ability, civilians are not harmed.
And do you think that they're doing that to the best of their abilities?
I think that there's a gap between the intent that's stated to do that and some of the results that we've seen, and we want to make sure that that gap is closed.
So do you believe Israel is committing a genocide?
No.
Okay. Why did the State Department mourn the death of President Raisi?
We've offered official condolences in the past when countries lose their leaders. That doesn't change in any way the fact that Mr. Raisi horrifically repressed his own people as a judge and then as president of the country. It doesn't change in any way our policy toward Iran.
You agree Iran is the greatest state sponsor of terror, correct?
If it's not number one, it's certainly very near the top of the list.
Okay, and do you agree that they fund Hamas about roughly 93% of their budget?
Hamas has been significantly funded by Iran. Of course, Hamas has also been funded by other sources, but Iran, yes. Is
do you believe that Iran and its proxies, Hamas, want to wipe Israel off the face of the earth?
I do.
You agree that's their stated goal?
That's their stated goal. You're right.
Okay, so if you know that's their stated goal, number one, why would we recognize the death of the butcher of Tehran? And number two, why are you withholding weapons and making it harder for Israel to defend itself, knowing full well, as you just testified, that Iran and Hamas want to wipe Israel off the face of the earth?
Yes, and we've done everything that we can do to make sure that Israel has the means to deal effectively with Hamas, including making sure October 7th never happens again. The question is, what is the best way to get an enduring resolution to the problem of Hamas? We have
Well, the best way to do it is for Hamas to surrender and release the hostages,
yes,
is it not?
Yes,
okay.
Absolutely.
So this administration has been an abject disaster when it comes to Iran. Since Joe Biden took office, Iranian petroleum sales are up $88 billion. It's why I fought to get my bill, the SHIP Act, and the Iran-China Energy Sanctions Act passed. Are you prepared to enact these into law as part of the administration? And what steps have been taken since this bill was passed weeks ago to start enacting the SHIP Act?
We have found and deemed as blocked more than 50 ships. We'll continue to identify others. We're working to deflag ships so that they can't move and get services from port to port to get at the fleet that is conducting the illicit trade in oil and petrochemical products.
And you agree China is the biggest purchaser of Iranian petroleum?
China is certainly, again, either at the top of the list or near it. Yes.
Thank you. My time has expired. I now recognize Madeleine Dean for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Secretary Blinken, for being here today for your years of faithful service.
What do you say to Marjorie Taylor Greene and others who are trying to kick him out and do the same thing that we saw in the fall?
I think it's not only idiotic, but it actually does not do anything to advance the conservative movement. And in fact, it undermines the country and our majority. And I think everyone should be focused on the task at hand. We have an affordability crisis in this country. We have a catastrophe at our southern border, high crime in major cities like New York. We have a foreign policy disaster, one after another, under Joe Biden, from the disastrous withdrawal in Afghanistan to the Russian invasion of Ukraine to the terrorist attack on Israel. And the American people agree with us on the issues. What they don't agree with is the idiocy and the chaos that is totally unnecessary and does nothing to actually solve the problem. The people that are so upset about this bill today should have thought about that long and hard before they removed Kevin McCarthy as Speaker. They should have thought about that long and hard before they undermined the conference by taking down rules, by trying to renegotiate the top line on the appropriations bills for months. They wasted valuable time that could have been focused on other issues at this moment.
Do you worry this is going to cost you the majority?
No, I don't, and here's why. The issues are on our side.
New York.
Well, Moscow Marjorie has clearly gone off the deep end, maybe the result of a space laser. But this type of tantrum is absolutely unacceptable, and it does nothing to further the cause of the conservative movement. The only people who have stymied our ability to govern are the very people that have pulled these types of stunts throughout the course of this Congress to undermine the House Republican majority. The American people gave us the responsibility to serve as a check and balance on Joe Biden and his disastrous policies, from the disastrous withdrawal in Afghanistan, the Russian invasion of Ukraine that resulted, the terrorist attack on Israel because of the appeasement of Iran, the increase in Iranian petroleum sales, $88 billion, and the fiasco at our southern border. That is a direct result of the policies of Joe Biden. The reason we don't have border security is because we have members in our conference who refuse to pass a rule, members in our conference who refuse to sign on to a CR that had border security, members in our conference who have continually undermined the Speaker's ability to negotiate. That is why, if they're so upset about the things that haven't happened, they should take a look in a mirror, starting with Marjorie Taylor Greene.
How do you think this episode?
What happened today was unimaginable, tragic, and should anger every American. We pray for President Trump and his family and those that were in attendance, but we pray for our nation as well. We are deeply divided, but the rhetoric, the violence, the vitriol, it has to stop. We cannot continue down this path. Our elections should be determined by voters, not violence. As Americans, all of us should be demanding better of our elected officials and of each other. The vitriol and the violence, it has to stop, and it has to stop now.
Yeah, this is perfect. All right, what do you think of this plan by Speaker Johnson?
Look, my objective from the very beginning has been to get an aid package to the floor. China, Russia, and Iran are a grave threat to the free world. We see between China being the biggest purchaser of Iranian petroleum, Iran being the greatest state sponsor of terror, funding Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, directly attacking Israel this weekend. We need to get aid. I don't care procedurally how we do it. I care about the fact that it gets done. And so if this is the plan that the Speaker puts forth to build consensus within the conference, to get a vote on the floor, I support it. And the objective, ultimately, putting process and procedure aside, is to make sure that our allies have the support.
If any of these pass with Democratic votes, or if Marjorie Taylor Greene, she says she hasn't decided what she's going to do yet, if she sparks a motion to vacate and the Speaker stays in office because of Democrats, what do you think of that? Other Republicans say that weakens everything.
Look, right now, that's not my focus. My focus is on supporting our allies. I have a bill passing tonight that is going after Chinese financial institutions, which are facilitating the purchase of Iranian petroleum. Under Joe Biden, Iranian petroleum sales are up $88 billion. $88 billion. So when you look at the challenges that we're facing, it is critically important that we get this aid package done. That is the focus. I'm not interested or focused on what other members may do as a result of a vote. The objective is to get this vote done.
So with these 4 bills going out individually, right, that's what the plan that was presented.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's been a challenge for the conference to pass a rule. Do you think the conference will allow these rules to pass for each of these individual aid bills and let them vote their conscience then? Because, they won't be held to
Look,
the fire.
that is the hope. I mean, listen, the Speaker is laying out a plan that allows members to vote their conscience, to voice their opinion on these issues. I know there is a division on Ukraine, but the vast majority of the House and the Congress supports aid to Ukraine. And if this is what needs to be done to allow for this aid to pass procedurally, that's fine. It is not an issue. I do think we'll be able to get the rule passed because I think members will have the opportunity to vote their conscience.
What's the number 4?
I'm sorry?
What's the number 4?
I think there's provisions pertaining to TikTok and other legislation. We're talking about border, and I will leave it to the Speaker to announce what he plans to do on that. But the bottom line is, I introduced, along with Brian Fitzpatrick and Jared Golden, a bill that would provide $66 billion in lethal aid to our allies, as well as enact Remain in Mexico Title 42. Obviously, we need to secure our border. House Republicans passed H.R. 2 in May of last year that actually would secure the border. When Senate Democrats sent a bill over here, they had no border provisions. They can talk about negotiations all they want. They never passed a bill. And so, the objective to me, obviously, is to get aid and
Recognizes Mr. Lawler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to follow up on my colleagues' questions here. General McKenzie, when did you retire?
1 April 2022.
Okay. And General Milley, when did you retire?
I came out of my duty position on the night of the 30th of September, and I officially retired 1 November.
Okay. And so at any point between the disastrous withdrawal in Afghanistan and to today, have either of you spoken with Sergeant Vargas Andrews?
I have not personally spoken to Vargas. I want to speak to him, but I have not. That's correct.
Okay. He testified before this committee a year ago. Are you both aware of that?
I am.
Did you watch his testimony?
I did.
I did not.
Did you get a report on his testimony?
Yes, I did.
And at no point did you feel the need to reach out to him or ask for a meeting based on his testimony?
For me personally, that would be inappropriate because while I was in uniform as chairman, there's an active investigation that was going on. Sergeant Vargas was part of that. And it'd be very inappropriate for me to meet with any of the potential witnesses during an active investigation.
And from your standpoint?
And the CENTCOM investigation has actually been reopened, so that's still an active investigation. So no, I would not have.
Okay, so based on an active investigation, how are you going to meet with them today if
We're
that's
not
the
on
standard?
active duty anymore. So
That CENTCOM investigation's been closed. It has not yet been briefed to the families, but that investigation is no longer active.
Okay,
Plus,
so as of today, you're both going to seek to meet with him?
yes, but also we're in different statuses now. So we're no longer on active duty. He was a commander, I was a chairman. And you don't want unlawful command influence on an active investigation. So that's while in uniform. Now we're not in uniform, and I want to meet with Sergeant Vargas.
Okay. With respect to the decision by President Biden to announce September 11th as the deadline for full U.S. military withdrawal, was there any tactical or military reason for that date?
Not that I'm aware of.
Not that I know.
Okay. So was it purely political and from the standpoint of a symbolic date from your understanding?
I'll be candid. I don't even know where or who made the decision of the 11 September thing. I frankly thought it was actually inappropriate at the moment in time, but it was very rapidly changed to the end of August.
And you were never involved in the decision to do that?
Not to pick the date, no.
Okay. General McKenzie, you stated in your opening statement that you and you alone are responsible for the military operations that occurred during the withdrawal. Again, I asked, did you set the date for the withdrawal?
No, I did not.
Did you make the decision to bring our troop level to 0?
I did not.
President Biden is the commander-in-chief. Did he make those decisions?
Yes, he did.
So is it your position that he bears no responsibility for the aftermath, that you are the only one that bears the responsibility for the military operations?
So I was responsible for military operations. The Commander-in-Chief is responsible for those and all the other operations, to include those of the Department of State, all the other appropriate cabinet agencies. But
you report to the Commander-in-Chief?
I do.
Okay, so at the end of the day, is he responsible for the decision to set the date and to set the troop level to zero?
Yes.
So he bears responsibility, not just you?
That's correct.
Okay. General Milley, you told the Senate and House Armed Services Committees in September of 2021 that one provision of the Doha Agreement the Taliban adhered to was the most important one, which was do not attack us or the coalition forces. You said that the Taliban did not attack U.S. and coalition forces. Didn't the Taliban carry out at least some attacks against U.S. and coalition bases in 2021, including indirect fire attacks?
There were, but the Taliban themselves, the senior leaders who were part of this negotiation, they would deny that. The Taliban's a very amorphous organization. You know, you never can be certain if they have total control over their individual units with indirect fire. There were some attacks. The issue was a lethal attack. Really, that's the fundamental piece. And there was also some specifics about no VBIDs in the cities.
So in other words, it depends on the definition of it? I mean, what do you mean?
Not at all. So it says no attacks on, and I think Congressman Self has the agreement. I don't have it in front of me, but I think it says no attacks on U.S. or coalition forces. I can tell you in conversation with Zal Khalilzad, what they're talking about here is lethal attacks, really. But also, there's some specifics, I believe, and I'm doing it from memory without a document in front of me, about no VBIDs in the cities, no mass casualty attacks, those sorts of things. Now, the problem is they did adhere to most of that. There were some attacks. They weren't lethal. But they did pick up the pace on attacks on Afghan security forces. And that's really significant. By my memory, I think we're looking at somewhere between 30 and 40,000 attacks. It was like the peak of attacks on Afghan security forces occur in 20 and 21. It's a very significant amount of attacks on the Afghan security forces, leading obviously to the summer of 21. But the idea of not attacking coalition or U.S. forces, I would say largely that was adhered to by the Taliban.
Gentleman's time has expired. Chair recognizes Mr. Moran.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To quote Joe Biden, this is a big effing deal. And the reason is because for the first time, Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, Secretary Blinken, Secretary Austin, the military leadership, and this administration are being held accountable. Accountable to these Gold Star families and accountable to the American people. For 3 years, they've lied. They've obfuscated. They've tried to cover up. They've misled. All because they didn't want to take accountability for the disastrous withdrawal. That was based on a time frame. Because Joe Biden wanted to say that when the 20th anniversary of 9/11 hit, we were out of Afghanistan. That is the only reason that we're standing here today. Because he allowed politics to be his guiding light. He allowed politics to determine when we withdrew from Afghanistan, as opposed to the conditions on the ground, which is what the Doha Agreement called for. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, who proudly tells everybody she was the last person in the room, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris own this. 13 U.S. service members are dead because of them, period. Full stop. What this report tells us is very simple. This was preventable. It did not have to happen. That's what this report says. And I encourage every American to read it, to understand the facts and the information, not from the elected officials, not from the members of Congress, but from those who gave firsthand testimony sworn depositions and statements outlining one disastrous decision after the next. 13 U.S. service members are dead today. Their families never get to enjoy their company. Their children don't know them, don't get to experience the holidays, don't get to experience time on the beach as Joe Biden did as the 3rd anniversary hit. They don't get to sit in a mansion like Kamala Harris did on the 3rd anniversary. Disgraceful. Kamala Harris wants to be the President of the United States. She wants to be Commander-in-Chief. She needs to answer for this report immediately. If any of you in the press actually get the opportunity to ask her a question, don't ask her how she's feeling. Don't ask her, what's your day like? Don't ask her about what it's like to be the first female potentially to be President of the United States. Ask her about this report. Ask her about her decision to withdraw in advance of 9/11. That's what you should be asking her about. So I want to thank Chairman McCall for his effort to uncover the truth, to get accountability for these families, and to make sure that this never happens again. And let's be clear, this is just the beginning, not the end. There will be a reckoning for this administration and everyone that is accountable for these decisions.
Next, we have Mark and Jack.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes. As we've talked about repeatedly, the main way that Iran is funding their terror proxies has been through the illicit oil trade with China. And over the last 3.5 years under Kamala Harris and Joe Biden, the illicit oil trade has increased by over $100 billion. That is what is being used to fund Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, and other terror networks in the region. And it's what's being used to fund Iran's nuclear program. I have fought to get 2 of my bills, the SHIP Act and the Iran-China Energy Sanctions Act, passed through this Congress and signed into law. Both of these bills were included in the supplemental aid package that passed months ago. Regrettably, the administration has failed to act. They have failed to uphold the law. And only a few days ago did the President finally task the Secretary of Treasury and State with these authorities. Secretary Yellen was here before our August recess, and I asked her specifically about the SHIP Act, and you would have thought I was speaking to her in a foreign language. She had no idea what I was talking about. So my question is, how is cutting off Iran's revenue stream from China, where China is purchasing 90% of Iran's petroleum, how do you see that impacting Iran's ability to fund terrorism in the Middle East? Mr. Abrams.
It would be very important to do that. At the end of the Trump administration, Iran had reachable foreign currency assets of about $4 billion. And now it's something like $60 billion. I mean, they've made, as you said, over $100 billion. So denying them these resources, which, I mean, we know what they do with them, their own armed forces and these terror proxies, would have a real impact on the threats we face.
Any other comments?
Congressman, I would only add that during the Trump administration, one of the actions that was taken was specifically designating some of these Chinese companies, including Costco, which is a significant Chinese purchaser of Iranian origin crude. Those sort of sanctions were effective in deterring China from continuing to engage, which is how we got to the $4 billion number in foreign currency reserves. So additional sanctions that target those suppliers and those purchasers, I think, would be very beneficial to our counter-Iran policy.
Nice to see you, Chairman Lawler. As a resident originally of Rensselaer County, makes me proud. Let me just say that your characterization of the Biden administration's actions during this time, I think, are a little bit unfair. I'm not a surrogate or representative of the administration, but I think it's important to note that this administration took some very creative and effective action in closing the dollar auctions in Iraq, which were a massive sieve by which Iran and its proxies were able to gain dollars, as well as Syria, as well as other illicit actors. And as many as 80% of those transactions were sketchy at best. There's a lot of work to be done, but that happened under this administration. I think if you look across the recommendations in our testimonies, there's a lot of shared thinking here. And it's not because I'm a fake Democrat or Kerry or my colleagues are fake Republicans. It's because fundamentally, the Biden administration, the Trump administration, Republicans, Democrats really want the same thing here. The challenge becomes with what you're discussing when it comes to China is this implication of our China policy. When we start sanctioning Chinese entities, we start to implicate the issues and questions around Taiwan, and we get well away from my level of expertise, so I'll leave it there. But I will say that there is a tremendous amount of sanctions busting and evasion, which sanctions is not going to get to because they have de-dollarized these processes.
Look, a broken clock is right twice a day, okay? And yes, the administration has taken some actions that have supported the effort to crack down on Iran. But when Joe Biden and Kamala Harris came in, their objective was to renegotiate the Iran nuclear deal. And as part of that, they lifted the secondary sanctions that were implemented under the Trump administration to go after the purchasers of Iranian petroleum, okay? And so by doing that, the illicit oil trade was allowed to resume and thrive. And you have over $100 billion that came in. We've talked in this Congress about the $6 billion in unfrozen funds. That pales in comparison to what was allowed to occur under this illicit oil trade. So the approach to Iran has been wrong. This administration has taken a very wrong tact in trying to go after Iran and its proxy network, which is raining terror across the Middle East, and Hamas, where they get 93% of their budget comes from Iran. So these are fundamental problems that, frankly, this administration has failed miserably to address. And yes, if they take a right step, great, bravo. But they have taken many wrong steps that have created this climate we're dealing with. My time has expired.